Well, I think we can get started. So I'm going to officially say welcome everyone to our session today on how to transform buildings to be gas-free, focused on retrofitting existing buildings to be all electric. We have the latest thinking on retrofits from Levi Plaza to San Francisco International Airport to commercial electric kitchens. So we will talk through all of the topics on that radar, whether it's around buy-in, financing, and everything in between. So with that, I'll start with a quick set of introductions. My name is Marta Schantz. I'm the Senior Vice President with the Urban Land Institute's Greenprint Center for Building Performance. And we're part of a real estate industry group that looks at shaping the future of the built environment for transformative impact in communities worldwide. Greenprint, the center I run, is part of our research arm of ULI. We focus on climate mitigation, so making the business case for reducing carbon emissions and tying that to increased asset value. And electrification is very much part of our focus. Additionally, we have some fantastic speakers today. Becca Rushin, who is the Vice President of Sustainability with Jamestown. We have Amy Nagengast, who's the Energy Program Manager with the San Francisco International Airport. And we have Chris Galarza, who's the Culinary Sustainability Consultant with Forward Dining Solutions. Our plan today is for each of us to talk about 5 minutes or so to give a little intro on our perspectives around electrifying existing buildings and what that means in the market. And then we'll open it up to Q&A. I have some discussion questions prepared, but if folks in the audience have questions, we can go straight to those as well. So with that, a quick background. I mentioned that ULI, the Urban Land Institute, and our Greenprint Center looks at the business case for green buildings. And we're also specifically looking at the business case for electrifying buildings. So we have a report coming out on June 7th called Electrified. I know, very creative, where we're looking at the business case and the really kind of benefits or drivers behind electrification to get the real estate industry, the landlords, the developers, the owners on board. So I plan to talk through a few of these, talk through some challenges and solutions as well, and then get some real examples from the rest of our panelists. On the financial side of things, one of the nice things about retrofitting buildings to be all electric is that you don't necessarily need to have a huge incremental cost for this. There's a study in Colorado that showed retrofitting in office buildings gas-fired equipment at the end of its useful life also helps reduce those initial costs with only a 2% incremental cost difference from an otherwise kind of like-for-like retrofit. Additionally, if you think about downsizing and right-sizing your equipment for a more efficient system, that also helps reduce those costs and make retrofits pencil. And in London, for a bit of a global example, there was a study of heat pump retrofits where undertaking energy efficiency measures alongside a heat pump retrofit reduces the demand for heat and lowers energy bills by 60 to 90%. And then you add utility incentives on top of that have high efficiency incentives and rebates for electric appliances and building systems. And the financials are much nicer when we think about how they pencil. Additionally, regulations are starting to be more and more important, not just for new construction, also for existing buildings. Even though a city or a state may not currently have like a gas ban or that type of all electric requirement, many jurisdictions are very much moving steadily towards carbon emissions reduction goals, like Local Law 97 in New York City. Other cities and jurisdictions are looking at renewable energy targets. Others have energy efficiency standards and net zero initiatives. And so over time, these initiatives are all going to preclude like the use of fossil fuels in commercial real estate. And so responding to these policies and getting ahead of them can prove a very useful strategy for long-term planning. On the technical side, the benefits are that most of the technology already exists, which is very helpful in this front. And also the all electric technology is often more efficient than its conventional gas counterparts. I mean, heat pumps are 3 to 5 times more efficient than a standard gas or electric system. And there's also a lot of benefits around grid interactivity, tying in kind of distributed energy resources like on-site solar, battery storage, communicating with the utility grid to support demand response and really manage peak loads. All of those strategies, electric buildings help even more so that they can tie into the grid and manage that cost and efficiency. And last, but certainly not least, the environmental benefits are a big part of the business case these days. On the corporate side of things, the real estate owners and developers may have net zero or decarbonization goals that all electric assets help meet. On the tenant or occupant side of things, a lot of owner occupiers or even just occupiers. The tenants have these corporate sustainability goals and they're choosing their space based on achieving those goals. And then additionally, there are these health and safety and resilience benefits that come along with building electrification that may be a little harder to quantify, but are very much still part of the benefits and business case behind it. So we look at how, when you look at the burning of natural gas, there's huge health concerns and it negatively affects indoor air quality. And further, when you think about beyond just indoor air quality, other benefits of all electric buildings are just that the higher performance technology has a huge increase in occupant comfort, which is another nice thing for occupants and tenants. And then lastly, we think about the infrastructure side of things, and aging natural gas infrastructure certainly has risks and challenges, whether it's earthquakes, fires, or explosions, and the safety and resilience side of that is also very important to think about. So a lot of good things about electrifying existing buildings, and the case can be made. However, the reason we're all here today is that there are still a lot of challenges. It's tough to time the retrofit right when you have occupants still in the building and the equipment is still functioning. Life cycle logistics are just a very complicating factor. It's tough also to ensure there's enough space, because a lot of times the existing conventional gas equipment has a smaller floor plate size than all electric options to install. And so thinking through the reconfiguration of central plant or other considerations has to play in as well. Additionally, there are weather considerations where cold weather climates just pose additional technology hurdles or concerns. The heat pumps have definitely improved over the past many years to not have to worry about those kind of sub-freezing temperatures, and today's models are better, but the concerns are still there. And additionally, when you isolate the increased upfront costs from other benefits like decreased operating expenses over time and decreased routine maintenance costs, those upfront costs are still something that can be a barrier when it comes to electrification, as opposed to just business as usual. We think about social equity as well, and how that complications. And what we need is just targeted investment and empowered communities to support this equitable transition to an all electric building environment. But there are a lot of concerns that in the current market, electricity costs more than natural gas. And so if a building does get electrified, are the occupants saddled with a higher utility bill, and how do you justify that? And there's also the concern that as those folks who can afford and are proactive to get off the natural gas grid, the remaining folks on the grid have to share the burden of the costs for transmission and distribution of the gas. And so there are concerns there as well. Occupant preference is another concern that a lot of folks are worried about on the developer, but definitely the owner side of as well when we think about existing building electrification. And I know that all of our panelists will speak to that, but when we think about electric stoves in particular, that is one thing that continues to come up as a challenge and a concern. And when we think about the utility infrastructure, in some regions, building owners are concerned that the incremental increased electricity demand from an all-electric building retrofit is more than the grid infrastructure can supply in that subsystem. And so there are additional concerns even from that when you think about the increase in electric vehicles being plugged into the buildings. So there's a lot of concerns. Luckily, solutions do exist. It's not all bad. It is happening. Electric building retrofits are happening, and not just because of regulations. They're happening because there's a case for it. In the way that folks are doing this, they're optimizing their timing when tenants have vacancies or when there's occupant turnover to make those improvements when the schedule makes sense. And they're scheduling for equipment turnover when it comes to capital improvements and other capital plans, is specifically for when equipment is due for replacement, so that there's just that incremental cost for an all-electric alternative as opposed to early replacement of the equipment. The image here is of the Jamestown Levi Plaza campus that Becca is going to be talking about. And each of those buildings has a different timeline and a different plan based on all of these different type of considerations to be really strategic about that. Additionally, the folks who are doing this and making a case for it are getting buy-in across the board, with very clear communication and very clear coordination with their occupants. with property teams who are running the buildings and with the local utility. Communicating energy and non-energy benefits of electrification, coordinating with property teams so they understand the real value, and reaching out to the utility early and often to make sure that all the concerns are addressed. And then from there, it's just up to scaling it across the portfolio, planning, investing, implementing, and optimizing portfolio-wide. So with that, I'm going to pass it to Becca to talk us through how Jamestown is looking at building electrification retrofits at Levi Plaza.
Thanks, Marta. I really appreciate it. Can you hear me okay? Great. Really happy to be here. I think this is a great forum to share and exchange ideas. So please, don't hesitate to ask questions in the chat, and we'll get to those. My name is Becca Rushin. As Marta said, I work for Jamestown, and if you're not familiar with us, we're a design-focused real estate investment and management firm. As of the end of March, we have about $12.6 billion in assets under management. And we operate in most major coastal markets: New York, Boston, DC, LA, San Francisco. I'm at our Atlanta headquarters, but we also have European business as well as some development projects in Latin America. So when it comes to Levi's Plaza, you can advance the slide, Marta. Great, thank you. So Levi's Plaza is an iconic campus in San Francisco. As you can see in the picture, it's got a lot of open space, beautiful plaza, park, walking trails, very peaceful, lots of outdoor terraces and greenery, and it's large. It's almost 900,000 square feet. And when we purchased Levi's Plaza, it was frankly on my radar as a sustainability leader that this was going to be an asset where, we wanted to make an impact and we wanted to make positive improvements. You can go to the next slide, Marta. I'm going to talk about our net zero carbon commitment, but just to kind of frame it up, Jamestown as a company has a corporate net zero target, which is net zero operational carbon by 2050. That includes Scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions. And the reason we set that target was because we had a 20% reduction target by 2024, which we actually met 4 years early. I don't know about those listening, but when it comes to setting targets, I think the first time we did it, we weren't totally sure how we were going to do it. And when it comes to the net zero target, we've really jumped in with the strategic planning in terms of, how are we going to achieve this in the next 29 years. With Levi's Plaza, we really had strong asset management leadership. So I was planning on doing, kind of LEED certifications, your typical energy management. And it was really our asset manager and construction teams that kind of stepped up and said, let's go ahead and, really do this. We had some HVAC improvements coming up. So we were able to make the strategic commitment to make Levi's Plaza a net zero campus by 2025, and really kind of use it as a proof of concept for the rest of our portfolio. We, felt like this was, not just good for the environment, but would help us in terms of aligning with tenant and other stakeholder goals. We are going to do additional kind of innovation, materials selection, energy and water and waste management initiatives. But really our goal was to say, how can we eliminate fossil fuels? How far can we take this, right? How can we, continue to meet the needs of the tenants and leasing, but, effectively make the campus totally electrified. Let's add some solar, and let's go ahead and start purchasing 100% renewable electricity from the grid, which is a little bit unique that we can do that in California. We can't do that at all of our properties. So early on, we partnered with the Urban Land Institute. We've been really involved with the Department of Energy in the city of San Francisco to kind of say, look, there's lots of momentum here. There's lots of alignment. How can we kind of demonstrate that this can be done in existing buildings? One of the key ways that we're doing that is through green leasing. Green leasing is essentially proactive lease language that aligns landlord and tenant incentives, and it's really just kind of more tools for things like data sharing and efficiency and fit out standards. And we've had a lot of success using those tools across the portfolio to help achieve sustainability goals. So that's going to be an important part of our future leasing activity at Levi's. You can go to the next slide. So these are some of the things that we've thought about as we think about electrification for our portfolio. I guess a personal story first. I pay a lot of attention to indoor air quality, and I firsthand have seen how cooking can impact the indoor air quality in my home. So I can only imagine, what this is like in a larger, kind of restaurant format. We're very food and beverage driven. We're very food forward. And so, there's a lot of concerns that have come up, for potential food retail and how that's going to work. And I know Christopher is going to talk a little bit more about that. But one of the things that spoke to me the most was the resilience argument. I read a report that the city shared where in the event of a major earthquake, it could take up to 7 months to restore natural gas infrastructure, whereas electric infrastructure could be restored in as short of a time frame as like 7 days. And that really spoke volumes to me because, as an owner and operator, we want our tenants to be able to get back to work and to bounce back from any type of disruption. That, in addition to other air quality considerations, I think is really important. From a capital planning perspective, we did have some, planned HVAC improvements that we were really able to just kind of double down on. We are thinking a lot about cost and phasing. But really in terms of the long-term outlook, we basically have kind of lined up each building in terms of, when we're going to be able to make those replacements. And the timing did work out very well for this asset. Also, when we're thinking about performance opportunities, Marta mentioned kind of when you shift that energy demand, kind of what happens, right? So we're not only thinking about opportunities for solar and battery storage and demand response, but we're also thinking bigger picture about grid capacity. And so I think, this isn't a silver bullet that's going to happen overnight, but I think it's important, for those that do want to take a leadership position and do see themselves as innovators, to find partnerships to help figure it out. I think for us, I mentioned some of the food and beverage considerations. It's been really interesting to talk to people like Christopher and others that are doing such cool work to explore, how this can work in a commercial kitchen setting. I think this will be one of those things that we look back on in 20 years and it will seem like much less of a hurdle than it can seem like today. It's just something new. I mean, it happens. And then the last thing I'll mention is the policy landscape. I mean, at the end of the day, as Marta kind of mentioned, outside of our control, we're seeing the legislative changes. We're already seeing it in markets like San Jose and others. As an owner, it behooves us to really be at the forefront of that. So we want to be part of the conversation, both in terms of the challenges that we encounter, whether it be a technical challenge or, even a challenge with a tenant who has certain needs. But we see ourselves as a collaborator and really want to show that this can be done and help replicate it both within our portfolio and to share our lessons learned with others. So I'll stop there, but hopefully that was helpful.
Awesome. Thanks, Becca. I think that's a perfect kind of tee up to talk through all of the different considerations for how to make an electrification retrofit happen. Amy, what about from SFO?
Certainly. Hello, everybody. My name is Amy Nagengast, Energy Manager SFO. And so my job is certainly in charge of all of our energy consumption across campus, which is all of our vertical buildings and certainly all of our horizontal infrastructure as well. So I get to engage with facility folks and do lots of operational projects as well as new development projects and policy. So my comments today are about SFO's brand new electrification action plan for existing buildings. And SFO is a department of the city of San Francisco to support our own climate goals, our city's climate goals, our state and our world's climate goals. This is an action plan. So we are moving from theories to what we're going to do about it. And so today I want to take some time, so next slide, please, to talk about what the electrification action plan is give you a little bit of a flavor for it, and certainly hopes this opens the dialogue for you to develop your own and or to engage on how do we improve. So our plan, which we spent the better part of last year developing, is really organized into 4 phases. This short report will be released on our website in the beginning of July. So look back. You could also reach out to me and I can send forward some additional pre-read material if helpful. But the 4 strategies at its outset first is to get a good inventory. And so I'll talk a little bit more about what that entails. To partner and to pair with our asset inventory, which is really about, again, that natural gas equipment and how we move our existing equipment from natural gas to electricity. We also want to pair that with policies and processes and education. So certainly SFO, we own our own buildings, but a lot of our buildings we don't occupy. So there's certainly an engagement there with our tenants as key partners and stakeholders to make this electrification happen. And then lastly, it's really to bundle all of these strategies together in terms of what is our phase out plan into projects, getting financing and funding and design for all of them to put them together. So this plan is 4 years. We are currently in the 2021-2022, which is all about our asset inventory, which I want to go into just a little bit for the next 2 slides. So next slide, please. So San Francisco Airport as a whole, we use, in terms of our entire campus energy, 56% is roughly electricity and 44% is natural gas. So this plan that we're talking about that we developed is to look at that 44% to figure out how do we move that from gas to electricity. And a few layers of ways we look at that is where it's used. So certainly a third is in our terminal spaces, which you might all have been familiar with if you've flown through SFO, but then 2/3 of it is all of our outbuildings, which is a pretty significant part of our campus. The other layer that we add in is who occupies those spaces. So the city and county of San Francisco, we only occupy 20% of those spaces. So 80% of those spaces are occupied by tenants. And so it's really important to us to encourage and engage those tenants along this electrification journey with us. If you are a visual person, which I certainly am, on the right is just a map of our campus and where natural gas is used. So everything in blue are buildings that use natural gas, and that represents roughly 70% of our square footage, which is a lot. And it's certainly a big undertaking to do. And so while we have a good handle on natural gas consumption at a high level, what we're really looking for with this action plan is to figure out what uses that natural gas, what equipment uses that natural gas, to be able to forge a plan and identify electric alternatives, figure out where they're located, and the financing mechanisms to make that conversion that makes sense. So next slide, just to talk about a status of where we are with our inventory. So as I mentioned in our plan, we're in strategy A, looking at a detailed inventory, which is certainly a ton of work across our 103 buildings, but want to give you a sense of where we are. We separate this into 2, building equipment and restaurant equipment. So starting the left, this is just a snapshot of where we are to date on building equipment. So this is, we are going out to buildings. We are figuring out what equipment uses those natural gas and categorizing them so we can ultimately package them all together. So the left is just what SFO owns, not our tenants. So this is only a portion of the pie, if you will. But we have 115 pieces of different equipment that uses natural gas. A lot of it is for space heating, which you might expect, and certainly a smaller portion is for domestic hot water. And as a part of this remaining year and into next year, we're going to be going out to tenant spaces to do, again, that inventory on the building equipment. So that's on the building side. On the restaurant side, also equally important, which Chris will speak to in a little bit, is there's a lot of restaurant equipment that uses natural gas, and it's really important to us to engage those tenants as well. So what you're looking at the right is about 50% of our food and beverage tenants that we've inventoried so far. So we go into their spaces, we look at their equipment and figure out which ones use natural gas. So far, again, 50% is done in our terminal spaces, fryers, ovens, ranges and water heaters are those pieces of equipment that we're targeting. But certainly I know a couple others use fryers and other things. And so it's important to us when we think about how do we make this plan to convert people from natural gas to electricity, to figure out what piece of equipment that they need to convert. Next slide, and I'll just kind of wrap up here. So in summary, where we are is we are, again, inventorying our campus, our tenant spaces, SFO spaces, to put together this plan, understanding where the equipment is located, what it uses, what it does, so that ultimately we can put money and finance behind it to really convert ourselves over to an all-electric campus. And certainly, my email's here. I welcome questions if you have them specific to your campus. We have a wide range of uses, so there's a lot of technologies that we're deploying at SFO, and happy to continue the conversation larger on our electrification action plan, which again will come out in about a month, or in the interim, depending on your needs. So thanks for listening. Happy to engage in any questions.
Thank you, Amy. That was so good to think about the process and the plan behind electrification. You can't just go forth and electrify. There's a little more to it. And Chris, I'm looking through the Q&A box right now, and there's one question that tees you up perfectly. So I will read it and then pass it to you.
Let's do it.
And that is, how do we pry gas stoves from the cold, dead hands of chefs and foodies?
That's so perfect. I can imagine a more perfect encapsulation of what it actually is. So chefs by nature, we're stubborn. We don't like change. We don't like anything really. We like what we're comfortable with. The reality is that people don't, and chefs especially, don't tend to challenge their own beliefs, right? They don't tend to examine those beliefs and find out why that is. I just so happen to fall into a space that made me do just that. And I've now since then become like the special, like I'm the guy that they call to come and fix chefs, for instance. So case in point, I would get these calls from say Microsoft or whoever it is that wanted to change over to electric. And when I go into these meetings, I tend to find that there's a lot of these, what I call excuses. So there's a lot of these preconceived notions on what electric cooking is, and then these made up myths of why they can't do that. So we'll go into that later on in the slide, but I love that question. I wish I could frame it and put it up in my office. So why don't we go over to the next slide, and I'll explain who I am and what my company is all about. So my company is Forward Dining Solutions. We've been pushing sustainable kitchen design forward since 2019. And what sets us apart is that we're the only firm with real world working knowledge of electric cooking technology, because I myself ran an electric commercial kitchen for the last 5 or 6 years. I have experience in all facets of dining, from 5-star fine dining resorts to small scale restaurants. And I have experience working with multidisciplinary teams to achieve these goals. I kickstarted my career into electric cooking when I helped open Chatham University's Eden Hall campus, which is the world's first fully self-sustained university campus. And we housed the first university campus electric that was all electric. Never been done before. So we had to, what I say, have growing pains, because there was nobody to show us anything. I remember getting these equipment brought in, and I would talk to the reps and ask them to show us how it works, and they would say, figure it out. I sell it, I don't work it. So you guys are the expert, you figure it out. So that's what we had to do for ourselves. And since then, I've dedicated myself to helping chefs, restaurateurs, building owners find a way forward to sustainable kitchen design, to electric kitchens, and find a way to make it work for them. Because what we found was that this technology was able to reduce how our kitchen was ran, in the sense that it was cooler in the kitchen. It was more comfortable in the kitchen. Because of that, my staff was more comfortable. There was less altercations. Since we were an open kitchen, there was greater guest-facing interactions. We really blew people away by how much just the equipment itself changed the staff. And sometimes it worked a little too well, because up here in Pittsburgh, it gets pretty cold. So we were all wearing coats in the middle of the winter because there's no radiation, there's no radiant heat. So when we talk about electric kitchens, we primarily talk about induction cooking because a lot of times when we talk about induction ranges, people think of the coils. So if you go over to the next slide, we'll talk about what induction cooking actually is. So induction cooking is not gas, obviously. It's not those god-awful coils, and it's not the radiant heat. So what it is actually, it's a safer way of cooking. It uses magnets to heat up the food. So the easiest way to understand this is if you were to think of a microwave. These microwaves use these little tiny waves to penetrate the food and oscillate the water molecules at such a high rate of speed that it creates heat from the inside out. What we're doing is the exact same thing, but with a magnetic current. We are oscillating the ferrous molecules of the pan to make the pan itself the heating element, which is why you see that the water's boiling, but the ice cubes are still cold, because the only thing that gets hot is the pan itself, which makes it safer to use, which reduces cleanup time, which saves on the amount of chemicals you're buying, is bringing your overall operating costs down because of that. Your building's now not working as hard to maintain temperature because it's not radiating heat. And because it's so efficiently getting the pan hot, you're able to cook more food faster. And just save a lot of money in the process. So if you go over to the next slide, we can break that down. The pros and cons of cooking on induction. One back. So induction cooking is very high efficiently cooking. So 80 to 93% as opposed to gas, 35 to 50%. Those are top of the line. They do dip below that, but I just wanted to use the highest of quality. Gas ranges are about 35 to 50%. So if you have a 60,000 BTU range, at best, 30,000 BTUs is actually being used to cook. You're literally burning money away when you use gas. You're able to heat up quickly. You're able to have more precise temperature controls. So if I'm writing a recipe and I say, I'm going to need you to simmer that pot at medium low, what does that actually mean? You have low, medium, high. You have that gap. So it can, when you say on induction, put it on dial 2, you have a more consistent product. You have a more consistent recipe. You like, doesn't matter who's working there. It's going to be perfect every time. There's no idling equipment, which means that it's not on with nobody even using it, because it only works when that pan makes contact with that surface. There's no combustion, so there's no carbon, there's no CO. And to touch on that, right now we're living in an era of COVID-19. That's the big elephant in the room. That's why we're doing this not in person, we're doing it virtually. Mm-hmm. We've learned that COVID-19 attacks, the lungs, right? Among other things. So now we have the opportunity and the perfect excuse really to create a healthier environment for those who are affected and those who have breathing problems. The average carbon monoxide levels in the United States outside is about 0.03%, parts per million to about 2.5 parts per million. The federal guidelines say that it cannot exceed 9 parts per million before everything gets shut down. They try to find out why. In the commercial kitchen, it can easily exceed 200 parts per million. That is absolutely abhorrent, and we need to do better for our staff and for everyone that is surrounding that kitchen. The people that are in those offices above the kitchen. So this technology allows us to do that, and as well increase productivity. It's really a no-brainer. So there's also dramatic improvement to thermal comfort. So not only do you get cleaner air, but you're more comfortable while you're working. You're able to cook faster. You're more comfortable. You have cleaner air. It really is a no-brainer.
And Chris, one thing that you had mentioned earlier that I think is worth noting is that for a retrofit of an existing kitchen, the equipment's the same size as the conventional gas, right? For a retrofit, it's doable. Yeah,
correct. So the idea is that they want to one-to-one swap this equipment out. So these companies who are creating this technology are able to just do just that. They want to make it as easy as possible for you to swap this equipment out to their equipment, and it also helps from a design standpoint where you're not having to adjust the design too often. That's the floor print you have. You just pick the equipment that's best.
Awesome.
Induction equipment really is the way of the future, and it's nothing new. Europeans have been doing it for 30 years. We just need to catch up. So I'm here to help with that process, and talking about some of the chefs who were saying just that you have to pry the gas ranges off from their cold dead hands. I've heard everything from you can't saute an induction because once it leaves that surface, you can't cook any longer. Well, it's the same thing when you pull it off a fire. I mean, metal holds on to heat, so that's BS. I actually heard that the staff, one of the staff members has a pacemaker and they can't be around the electromagnetic current. To which I said that it's only basically above 3 inches above the surface, and the only way that it's going to interfere with the pacemaker is if they're laying on top of the equipment. So gas or electric, bad idea. Don't lay on top of the equipment. Whole other conversation that needs to be had. And there's a lot of other things. So in closing, when it comes to these retrofits, induction technology needs to be at the heart of it. And there's really no other conversation out there as far as the complaints about electric cooking other than that. So let's change hearts and minds.
Fantastic. This was I think the perfect kind of combination of different examples and cases where folks are very much focused on retrofitting existing buildings. And I've been looking through in the Q&A. Amy's done some nice work responding to specific questions. So I'm going to go to Becca first. And there's a question about the CFO. And the question is, Becca, how do you frame the discussion for the CFO who has to sign off on the investment budget for electrification? How do you frame that? How do you make the case?
I mean, honestly, I would frame it as what's the cost of not electrifying? You know, we're at this point where we have equipment that we knew we were replacing, we were making a major investment. And so really it ends up being an incremental increase in the grand scheme. And you're also insulating yourself from that transition risk of, you know, being unprepared when eventual legislation is passed. Can I answer another question as well that I see in the chat? Great. I see the question about how to start the conversation with the landlord, right? And as someone who works with the landlord but doesn't always get to talk to the tenants, I'm seeing a lot more dialogue within the industry. You know, when it comes to green leasing and sustainability in general, frankly, this is a conversation that should start as early in the leasing phase as possible to maximize collaboration. But even if you're in an existing space, I mean, I would say reach out to their sustainability person through your property manager or their director of operations. You know, I think these days, even, you know, smaller landlords without a person like me have someone that's thinking about this. And, you know, I think there's, you know, we're very responsive to tenant requests and desires. So I would just encourage you to start the conversation and definitely pay attention to the evolving resources like the ULI report. And I think it's helpful to show that it can be done and this is something that's happening.
Awesome. All right, Amy, there's a question that you answered, but I'm going to tweak it a little bit because I think it's interesting when we talk about who pays for the transition and how you coordinate it all with tenants, right? Because tenants own some equipment, but not other equipment. Can you talk through your initial strategy for engaging with tenants and cost share?
Yeah, I mean, it's realistically a few layers. That is certainly not a straightforward solution to that. So all of our tenants have different lease lengths and lease languages. And so we are, as part of SFO, certainly looking to alternative lease arrangements when those leases expire. So part of this, you know, inventorying is understanding when their leases expire and really having the conversation roughly 2 years before that occurs. Certainly, you know, as stewards and partners, we're looking at alternative funding, you know, and whether that is through grants that are available, through our utility that might be available, and to start, you know, bringing together the resources that we have and that they have. Additionally, if they have, whether it's United Airlines or some others that have large climate goals, that also might lend itself quite well to electrification efforts. So it's really understanding the motivations, where they are, what are some of the challenges, when do their leases expire, and both carrots and sticks are on the table. Like, we are a partner that engages early and often so we can get to the end state the most efficiently.
Awesome. Okay. That is helpful. I think that's important to have that bigger picture take on things. As we mentioned before, if it were easy, everyone would have already done this. Chris, there's one question specifically about walks. Can you talk through how to overcome the walk challenge? You're on mute.
So the walks were a real challenge for a while, but that challenge has been solved. I mean, there are companies out there that have created a concave work surface that you can put your pan right into, and it gives you that walk-hay that most chefs who work on walks are used to. So that to be honest, has been solved. There's a big industrial walk that was unveiled in the 2019 National Restaurant Association show. It was massive, and they've since come up with smaller technologies that can just be, put right into like a countertop. So there's different options out there. Jade Range does custom work, and they can do walks, and they're here in the United States as well. So there's plenty of options there that can mimic walk hay and keep costs relatively low than what things used to be.
Awesome. One other technology, Chris, is fryers. I'm curious if you or Amy want to talk about what you found, since the SFO chart showed fryers as a main user of natural gas.
Yeah, so fryer technology has come a long way, and there are companies like FryMaster that offer gas and electric variants. And the way it works is by inputting an element into the fryer. And I prefer those, honestly, because what it does is it gives you the ability to reduce how much oil you're using, because those are about 50% reduction in oil consumption, as opposed to a 70-pound fryer using a 35-pound fryer. And as it's coming up, it's slowly turning itself on and off. So it slowly brings up that temperature of the oil, which helps prolong the life of the oil as well as being able to filter it. So by going with those energy efficient ones with the element on the inside, you're cutting your oil by half and extending the oil life by a few days. And that's huge right there.
Nice. I like that. All right. We've got another question, and this is great because all of these align with the talking points we'd hope to cover in discussion. And this one is about staging retrofits. So Becca or Amy, if you want to chime in on this, could you discuss strategies for incremental retrofits, like vertical heat pump packages for schools or other building systems that aren't slated for complete HVAC overhaul and currently rely on like gas boilers? Like how are you planning through incremental retrofits?
Amy, do you want to take that one? I see one on renewables that I'm dying to answer, but I feel like you might be better suited.
Yeah, for sure. So incremental are certainly important. I think part of it is understanding that equipment inventory, right? So is certain ones at the end of the life? Can you focus certainly on maybe domestic hot water because it's better suited with a vent to the outside that is in a better location? The biggest thing realistically, even as an owner at SFO, and we're looking to transition, 44% of our energy use from natural gas to electricity, is making sure we have the sufficient electrical capacity to support that. So that certainly has some upstream impacts. I think part of it is understanding, when is that switch? When do you might need an electrical upgrade, if you do, or if you can avoid it by a bunch of efficiency, pairing lighting and other kind of efficiency work with, a heat pump or other things that has a higher electrical capacity requirement over a natural gas boiler. So in summary, how do you incrementally do it? I think certainly strategically looking at where it's located, where, if it's at the end of its life, and certainly space constraints and so on and so forth. And then the amount of electrical capacity you have. I mean, I think easier wins is where we all need to start. We don't need to go for like the big bodacious everything if we can only start small and start to gain that momentum and have people talking about it. So those would be, some recommendations. I have a ton of experience on that. So if you want to email me, happy to have lots of conversations on the incremental work.
Becca, bring it on with the renewables integration.
So just a funny story. So we worked with Integral to kind of evaluate at a high level, like how we could achieve net zero at Levi's Plaza. And it was hilarious. Like my favorite example, and this is like the moonshot, was literally putting a giant solar array over the whole campus. And, because there's limited roof area, like there's only so much that you can do. And so, when it comes to renewables, we're lucky to be in a market where you can buy renewable energy from the grid in addition to what you produce on site. So, I would say it's an important part of our strategy, but it's not going to power 100% of our project. In our first building, we're hoping to power at least one tenant space. But, as a diversified owner with lots of stuff going on, we like to put in rooftop amenities and other things. And so I think it's just important to be realistic and kind of follow that hierarchy of, reducing your demand, looking at your supply, doing what you can on site. And then once you've exhausted all of those opportunities, look at offsets and that sort of thing.
Awesome. All right, we are at time. This 45 minutes absolutely flew by. I think we could talk about electrification retrofits until the cows come home. So I just want to take a moment and say thank you everyone for joining us. There's a survey in the chat box that I encourage you to fill out. Thank you to our speakers, Becca and Amy and Chris. Great examples, very helpful, and hopefully have inspired other folks to take those incremental steps, figure out their opportunities, and go forth and electrify.
Yes, ma'am. Yeah, together is the only way that we make these changes happen.
Totally.
Thanks again, everyone.
Take care.
Enjoy the rest of the conference.
Thank you, everyone.